All right, guys. So I am going to be going over, here we go, the Unit 5 end of unit review. So this is before you take your end of unit quiz for Unit 5. And we start off with just three basic volume questions. Okay, so we've got all three shapes that we learned about here. We've got the cylinder first, the cone second, and then on the bottom of the page there, the sphere. The first thing I always like to do, doesn't matter what information the question gives me. I know it's a volume problem. I mean, that's what this second half of Unit 5 is all about. First thing I like to do is write out the formula. So that's what I'm going to do for each one of these. Right? For a cylinder, don't forget any formula for volume is including finding the area of the base and multiplying it by the height. So it's a circular base. Area of a circle is pi r squared. And I'm going to multiply that by h, the height. Okay? And that's it for a cylinder. For a cone, it was 1/3 of that. If you guys remember that video we watched, it took filling up the cone 3 times for it to fill up the cylinder. So it's 1/3 of what we used for a cylinder. V equals 1/3 pi times radius squared times height. And then for the sphere, we found out that it was 4/3 pi times radius cubed. Or remember, some of the times we were saying that's the same thing as 4 times pi times radius cubed divided by 3. Okay, same thing, just a little different way of writing out that same formula. Okay, for all of these, we know R stands for radius and H stands for height. For the first one, actually, I notice it's the same for all three of these. My radius isn't given to me. They give me the diameter, and from that, I can get the radius, but they give me the diameter. They don't give me the radius, so I've got to do a little bit of work. For this cylinder, I see here it says it has a radius, it has a diameter of 12, so I need to cut that in half to find the radius, because the radius is just from the center of the circle to any edge. So half of 12 is 6, and now I'm ready to fill in everything I know. My volume is found by taking pi, multiplying it by the radius squared. Well, we just found out that the radius was 6, so times 6 squared. And that's multiplied by the height, which we see here the height is the distance between the two bases, and that is 9. So I've got pi times 6 squared times 9. Now 6 squared means 6 times itself. 6 times 6 is 36. So I write this out again. I have pi times 36 times 9. And when I use my calculator, type that in, 36 times 9, I get 324 pi. I keep pi on my answer, and that is in kilometers cubed, or cubic kilometers, right? And that's my first answer. It asked me to write two answers. The first answer is in terms of pi. That's what I did, right? That's what we practiced a lot last week. And then the second answer, they want us to actually put in 3.14 for pi. So for my second answer, I'm going to do 324 times 3.14. And they ask us to round that to the nearest tenth. So when I do 324 times 3.14, I get 1017.36, and then rounding to the nearest tenth, with that 3 would round up to a 4 kilometers cubed, or cubic kilometers. And there's my two answers. Those two answers, remember, are the same thing. It's just one of them I don't multiply by 3.14. I leave the pi symbol in my answer. That's the first one. And then the second one, I actually did multiply by 3.14. There is no pi symbol in my answer. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for this cone. So for this cone, again, they gave me the diameter. I need the radius, so I need to take half of that 10 that they give me for the diameter. So I'm going to substitute in everything I know. V equals 1/3 times pi. I'm going to leave the pi symbol in my first answer, right? The radius, half of 10 is 5, so I've got times 5 squared. And then that's times the height, which the height is 10 they give me. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify what I can. 1/3 will stay the same. Pi will stay the same. 5 squared is 25, and then 25 times 10 is 250. 1/3 times pi times 250. Now I can do the 250 times 1/3, or take 250 and divide it by 3. Either way, that gets me my answer of 83.3 repeating, which we know is 83 and 1/3 pi. And then this one is in miles. It's a huge cone. So this is 83 and 1/3 pi cubic miles for my first answer. Now for my second answer, I'm actually going to go ahead and multiply 83 and 1/3. Or I'm actually going to multiply 83 and 1/3 by pi. So times 3.14. And when I type that into my calculator, I get times 3.14. I get 261. Put an equal sign there. Oh, I guess I got room over here. Let's put it over here. I wrote it down wrong anyways. It's 261.6 repeating, which we know is the same thing as 2/3 cubic miles. Like I said, that's a really big cone. Really big cone. For number 3, same thing. I don't care which way you find the volume. Doesn't matter to me. I like the one that has the fraction in the front. I'm going to use that top one where it says 4/3. Now this one, again, they gave us the diameter. The diameter is 20, so I need to take half of that. My radius is 10. So when I substitute in everything I know, for the sphere, remember we only needed the radius. So it's 4/3 times pi, times 10 cubed. Well, that equals 4/3. It's an awful 3. 4/3 times pi times 1,000. Because 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. And then when I do 4/3 times 1,000, I get 1,333, and that's 0.3 repeating, which we know is 1/3 pi. My units for this one is yards. So I'm going to put cubic yards for my answer there. Or I've got to put that answer without pi, without the pi symbol also. So I've got to multiply 1,333 and 1/3 times 3.14. Okay, and when I do that, use my calculator real quick, times 3.14, I get 4,186. And again, it's 0.6 repeating, which we know is 2/3. So 2/3, not pi. We do not need pi for this one. And that is yards cubed, or cubic yards. So those answers, don't forget, are the same. I know one looks a lot bigger. It's just because you multiplied it by 3.14, right? So those are saying the same volume, and that's the front page. Now when you flip over to the back, it's kind of combining what we learned in the first half of Unit 5 with what we learned in the second half of Unit 5. So the first half of Unit 5 was all about functions. Were they linear? Were they nonlinear? Were they increasing? Were they decreasing? Right? Was it even a function? Did it pass the vertical line test? Remember all that from the first half of Unit 5. The second half of Unit 5 was all about volume. So we're kind of combining the two with this question here, right? So this question says, for cylinders with a radius of 3 units. So a cylinder with a radius of 3. Again, I got to write down my formula. That's always the first thing I do. Pi times radius squared times the height. The equation V equals 9 pi h. Now that looks a lot like the equation I just wrote down. The formula for the volume of a cylinder, except they have 9. When they said that the radius was 3, all they did was put in 3 for the radius. And 3 squared, 3 times 3, is 9. And then they just moved it to the front. They still have this pi symbol in the equation. It's right there. they still have the height, the h, in their equation. It's right there at the end. Okay, so all they did was put in r, the value of r that we have. They said for cylinders with radius 3 units. So that means every cylinder that is for this problem has a radius of 3 units. We have the equation v equals 9 times pi times height. That makes sense. They use the formula. And that relates the height of the cylinder to its volume. Okay, so what they're asking us to do here is to sketch a graph of this comparing its height to its volume. And that's exactly what I'm going to do, is label my axes. That's the first thing I should do. Label this height, and then my, turn this sideways, y-axis is measuring volume. Okay, well, using h as my x value for the height, it goes on the x-axis. If I use h as that, if I put in 0 to that equation for the height, what's the volume going to be? You don't even need to actually plug it in to know that. We know that that's showing all multiplication, 9 times pi times h. And if one of those numbers is 0, we know multiplying by 0 always gets you an answer of 0, right? So my first point I'm going to put on here when they ask me to sketch the graph, I'm going to put a point right there at the origin at 0, 0. Because when h is 1, or sorry, when h is 0, when the height is 0, yeah, the volume is also 0. Okay, well, what about when the height is 1? If the height is 1, if I put in 1 for h, what's that going to give me? Well, I'm going to use that equation. So v equals 9 times pi times h, but instead of h, I'm going to put 1. Well, what's my volume? For pi, we're going to use 3.14, so I'm going to do 9 times 3.14, and that gets me 28.26 times 1, right? Well, anything times 1 is itself. So when the height is 1, the volume is 28.26, and that's what I'm going to graph next. That would be somewhere right around there. And then I'm going to figure out, well, what's the volume when the height is 2, right? And I'm going to do that for every single one of these numbers on the x-axis. When the height is 2, I'm going to rewrite this equation, v equals 28.26, but instead of multiplying it by 1, because the height's not 1 anymore, now it's 2. Multiply that by 2. Use my calculator, 28.26 times 2 is 56.52. So I go to 56.52. Put another point, right? And then I keep doing that. What about when the height is 3? Well, I'm going to do v equals 28.26 times 3. And I'm going to keep going all the way until I have all of those points graphed, and it should look something like this. I was a little bit off on one of my points there. Let's fix that guy. Should be more like down here. Okay, your line, when you graph all of those points, when you put in all of those different values for h, for that equation, it should give you a line that looks something like this. Okay. So now that I have that done, what do you notice? In other words, how would you describe this graph? Right? This is a function. I told you that it's a function. What kind of function is it? Okay, a couple of those phrases that we talked about that I would use to describe it is that it's linear, right? The slope stays the same the whole way through. Remember, that's how we defined what was linear and what wasn't. Does it have a constant slope? Does it have a constant rate of change? And I would also say that it's increasing. And I know that because it's going up from left to right. If it was going down from left to right, then it would be a decreasing function. But it's linear and it's increasing. And that's really all we need to notice there. I could also say that it's a proportional relationship because it starts at 0, 0. It goes through the origin, right? So all of those things are things that I notice. I'm going to stick with the function things that we talked about. It's linear and it's increasing. All right, last question of the review, and you guys are ready to dominate this quiz. It says the volume of a cylinder. Boom, I don't even need to read the rest of it. I'm going to go ahead and write down the volume formula for a cylinder. V equals pi times radius squared times the height. Okay, the volume of a cylinder is 4,224.8 cubic millimeters, and its diameter is 16.4 millimeters. Find the height. So this is a working backwards problem. They're asking us to find the height. I'm going to put in what I know. I know the volume. Whoops. I know the volume. It says it right here. It says the volume is 4,224.8 cubic millimeters. So let's put that in place of V. Go ahead and put 4,224.8. I know pi, right? We're using 3.14 for pi. My radius, they don't tell me the radius, but they do tell me right here that the diameter is 16.4. So half of that's the radius. Half of 16.4 is 8.2. So I'm going to multiply that by 8.2 squared, because it's always radius squared for a cylinder. And then multiply that by the height. Well, that's the one thing I don't know. So I'm going to leave it h. Okay. Now, it's an equation. It's just a two-step equation that we can solve. So let's solve it. Okay. I've got order of operations. Let's simplify this by following order of operations. Let's do our exponent first. 8.2 squared. So I've got 4,224.8 equals 3.14 times 8.2 squared. I'll use my calculator real quick. 8.2 squared is 67.24 times h. Right, so I simplified the exponent. Now I can do multiplication. 3.14 times 67.24 times. Let's see what we get. I have 4,224.8. That always stays the same because I haven't done anything to it yet. Equals 211.1336 times h. The h is still there. I've got to get the h by itself. I see it's being multiplied by 211.1336. So I'm going to divide both sides by 211.1336. And when I divide both sides by 211.1336, h is finally by itself, and that'll give me the height. Let's type that in real quick. 4,224.8 divided by 211.1336, and it gives us 20.01 for my height. Okay, before it doesn't say it on this problem, but before it said for us to round it to the nearest. Fix my answer there. Round it to the nearest tenth. If I rounded this one to the nearest tenth, my height would just be 20, because there's a 0 in the tenths place and there's a 1 in the hundredths place, so it's not going to round it up. So it's just 20. And what's my units here? Cubic millimeters. So 20 millimeters is my height. You guys are ready to take the quiz? Good luck. Yes, you can have this review paper out while you take the quiz.